So you might master a certain level of it and you're like, oh, I love myself now. And then life throws you something more difficult. And it's like, well, how are you going to show up to this? How are you going to show up to this one? How are you going to show up to this one? You can feel like I mastered it. I've got it all down. And so then my life should kind of be smooth. But actually, spiritually, for many of us, the lessons get more challenging. And then we have to amp up, how we're meeting the new lesson.
Okay, welcome back to the podcast. I am so over the moon and thrilled with today's guest. You may have heard me reference her like many, many times because she has been such an instrumental part of my journey. And so if you've been following along for years, you have heard me mention Michelle, my breathwork teacher, and Michelle is finally here. So, welcome, Michelle. And before we dig in, what would you like the listeners to know about you?
Well, thank you, Samara. It's totally an honor and so sweet to hear that. Um, well, I guess, yeah, I'm a breathwork facilitator, but I'm also a spiritual mentor. I'm a human being navigating this wild journey and just helping support other people go through it as well. That's really the deeper thing that's going on.
Mhm.
I'll just briefly say that I think the thing that is maybe most important to know about my journey is that I was in major resistance to it for a very long time.
Mhm.
I was very like intellectual, just like all in my head, disconnected from my emotions.
Mhm.
And essentially life forced me into myself, into my emotions, into my body, more deeply into a spiritual path. And that seems to be like the life journey is that there's more and more layers and lessons. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that, but that's sort of a little bit of the background.
Yes. And I'm really happy that you brought that up because I think one of the things that I immediately felt from you was this sense of like you get it. Like you understand that it can feel really hard to go on a healing journey. You understand what it's like to have like resistance and defensiveness and to not be willing to feel and to not be willing to look at things, but you also can really speak beautifully to like why it matters to you and why you continue even when it's hard. And so, in order to kind of like unpack this discussion, I would love to know more about what that resistance looked like and how that showed up for you before you actually got started on your healing path.
Yeah, let me think. Well, I was a graphic designer. I've always been a highly creative person, so I was never somebody who was like, I'm gonna do healing work for a living or like support other people. I always was naturally the person who was like a good listener and, getting called for advice and things like that. But I thought it would be miserable to be like listening to people's problems and stuff. But that was coming from a part of me that like hadn't overcome any of my own obstacles. So I didn't
Right.
understand that like I'd be able to have something actually to contribute to changing people's lives.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the thing that motivated me and took me on this path. So, I was in a lot of pain, actually, interestingly enough, because it's something that's come back around. But I was in a lot of pain from grinding my teeth at night. And so I was looking for a solution. I think I had like a pinched nerve, or some, it might have not even been a pinched nerve. It probably was more of like a mind body thing where I was experiencing pain when I was walking. And this was like predating me discovering breath work. It was probably around 2012 or something like that.
Mhm.
So I started to ask around for support. I found an Ayurvedic healer. The reason that I decided to work with him was actually intuitive. There was like some information that had come in earlier in my life, but I was disconnected from the fact that I was intuitive even back then. So that started, like I decided to work with him and he ended up telling me that he couldn't work with me because he couldn't help me because I asked him why and he was, very kindly told me that I was controlling and not trusting and that like some herbs and support in that way wasn't really going to make any difference, that I needed to do breath work. And so even from there, like there was a little piece of me that was open to asking him why, because I was dead set on, I know what I need and I need you to help me. And I'm broke and have no money. So I'm only going to pay you a little bit of money and you need to solve all of my problems. And he was like totally tuned into like, this chick has so much deeper, bigger work to do. She
Right.
needs to go do breath work. And
Hmm.
so there was so much resistance. Like I didn't want to, I was like, how is breathing going to change my life? This was back before, social media and people were talking about breath work, and breath work wasn't popular, the way that it is now back then. But I imagined it being just something kind of relaxing. And what's funny is that a relaxing breathing pattern could have been really helpful for me. So I mean, it just kind of illustrates that my mind was controlling me. It was dominating me. I felt like I knew what was best for me. And I
Mhm.
was really resistant to, I mean, there was so much control because there was so much fear of feeling and going inward and reckoning with these parts of me that essentially were disconnected from love. So it was like bit by bit, I felt like I was like, all right, fine. And then I went and did breath work and I was like, okay, I think this is kind of good. I guess I'll kind of do it again. But it was very, very slow.
Yeah.
My teacher, David Elliott, has his first book was called The Reluctant Healer. And I'm sure a lot of people who are drawn to his work end up feeling that same way. But I was completely reluctant. Like, I didn't
Hmm.
even want to look at myself, but I sort of was like, the way that I look at it is that our lives will continue to push us up against the things that we actually have to look at if we want to grow. And
Yeah.
so that's what was happening to me. It's like, okay, well, this person's not going to work with you. So, like, try something else. And I tried something else. And I was like, again, a little bit like, I wasn't blown away, like, this is amazing. Breathwork is everything. Like, some people have that experience, but I was so resistant to pretty much anything that was outside of my paradigm that like it took a long time for me to really recognize what I needed, what I actually deeply needed, and surrender into that.
Mm. That honestly is so healing to hear because, and I had known this like in my head because I have been aware of you and like following you for so long. So it's like I've heard all these bits and pieces of information about Michelle, but to have it all be laid out in my mind, I am just having so much compassion for my younger self who was like in 2014 very, very depressed and like afraid that my depression was gonna like lower my ability to, do well in college and like learn what I need to learn and make friends and like whatever. And so when I got to college, the first thing I did was get a therapist. But then I remember telling my therapist, like, I don't think this is a good use of my time because you're supposed to make me more productive and you're not. And like now I'm taking time away from other stuff to sit here and talk to you. And just that sense of being like so controlling about it because I was like, I need this one specific thing to be solved for this one specific purpose. And if I don't immediately see that transaction happening right away, then all the like controlling anxiety comes out. And in some ways, I am noticing that, like, I mean, I don't know. For me, it feels like, okay, that awareness of depression needs to be addressed because the depression is stopping me from living my life to the fullest was something that I needed to like do something about. But because there were so many other like massive issues that were never going to be fixed by like, can you just like prescribe me a pill or whatever so I can like, you know, issues that really I needed to do like deep work on for years and years and years. I am grateful to my past self for at least like getting my foot in the door. And then for all the other past versions of me that opened up little by little by little, like you said, to like, okay, maybe I can go back to therapy, or maybe I can try this meditation thing, or maybe I can like read this book, or like whatever. And all those little decisions that opened up to like the bigger, like, okay, yes, I'm on a healing journey now, you know?
Yeah, it's so much about right timing. I get
Mhm.
a lot of messages from people who like less now because I think breathwork is becoming just so much more mainstream, but people who would just get really resistant to anything that felt like too much in the heart, self-love stuff isn't for me. And then they find themselves back around to it a year later, or 5 years later, 10 years later. And it's like, the conditions weren't right. And yeah, we have to have compassion for those parts of ourselves and just trust that like the timing is unfolding exactly as it needs to for us.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, this idea of like breathwork becoming more mainstream, do you think that's impacting like our collective healing in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. The more people, it's like a ripple effect. The more people, and if you think about, I think Deepak Chopra speaks very beautifully to this about, the collective consciousness and your field of consciousness as you evolve, as your consciousness expands, everybody who's in your field of awareness, their consciousness expands as well. So, the breath becoming much more popular and like more mainstream is only supporting people and getting into their bodies more, in whatever way they're doing it. They're at least getting in their bodies more. Many people are accessing more love for themselves and ultimately tuning in more deeply to the deeper truth that's alive within themselves. And those deeper truths are alive within all of us. So I think it helps us become more unified.
Yeah, unified is such a beautiful word and like way to think about it, especially because sometimes when you're on your healing journey, it can feel very isolating.
Yeah.
And it like not to say it is necessarily isolating, but it is so personal and you have to really be intimate with yourself. And at this point, I am starting to really see very clearly how me building that level of intimacy with myself has expanded out and like impacted relationships and like other things even beyond like the broader collective. But it's so important to remember that like while you're in the thick of it, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, it is really interesting to me how unique our experiences feel to us. Like when
Mhm.
we feel like we're broken or we feel like there's something wrong with us, it feels like everybody else has it together. Nobody else feels the way I'm feeling. There tends to be, we do tend, I mean, I don't know, this might be changing, but my experience has often been that I'm not in the same type of hardship as other people in my life. Like the conditions are kind of different. And so it can feel very isolating. Like I'm going through this really difficult thing. And like, even if people in my life are loving and compassionate, like they don't know exactly what this feels like right now in this moment. And there's
Yeah.
something about wanting to share that with others that I think is really innate in us. Like we don't want to be alone. But ultimately, the more that you alchemize that energy and you heal the hurt, you start to recognize that, everybody is reckoning with these things on some level at some point on their journey.
Yes. Yeah, and letting it like kind of look different for everyone, but still being willing to see the commonalities. Um, as you're saying that, one thing that I actually spoke with you about while it was happening that feels very related is something that went really wrong between me and my sister while a bunch of other things are going wrong in my life. And there was like a big rift between me and my sister, and we didn't talk for like I would say easily a year, but less than 2 years, but like some long period of time. And we used to talk like very consistently and like FaceTime for hours every week, and things just broke off. And now, as we are back in each other's lives regularly, I have started to develop so much compassion for like what that must have been like on her end and how whatever version of like her experience is so similar to different experiences that I have had. And it gives me so much empathy and like capacity to show up and to like, listen to her. And if something is like triggering for her in terms of our relationship, like to have space for it and to let her be with herself if she needs to, and if she does need space for whatever reason. But all of that comes from me being willing to see how like what she experienced at that time, even though I was a part of it, is very, very similar to other things I may have experienced with other people, and not making it so like, well, I went through this and you didn't go through this. And so therefore, I have no idea how you could possibly be feeling, or you have no idea how I'm possibly feeling, and all of that, you know?
It makes it, I think that's such a, it's one of the most beautiful things about the heartbreaks we experience is that it connects us more and more deeply to other people. When I went through a devastating heartbreak was part of my healing journey. initiated me into a dark night of the soul. And I was so utterly like just the epitome of heartbreak. And I remember feeling it actively turning on my compassion. Like I felt so much compassion for humanity, not people who were going through heartbreak, like humanity for everything that people were experiencing, no matter what it was. And I think what's so beautiful about what you're also speaking about with your sister is that we develop the capacity to honor other people's experiences without getting in our own defenses or whatever around it when we've learned how to tend to ourselves. So sometimes relationally, it means like, okay, I have to like put up like a hard boundary because I think that's what I need to do and not be in communication or whatever. But it gives us an opportunity to hold ourselves in a level of safety that maybe we aren't able to experience with that person. And then once we build that self-love, that ability to tend to ourselves, we can come back in the relationship, hold ourselves, and then hold the other person in their experience.
That feels so spot on, and really exactly what happened, like learning how to really know that I would love myself no matter what, and to know that I would have my own back, and taking that awareness with me into every situation made me so much less combative and so much less like feeling like I have something to prove to other people, or like taking on, I guess, like a projection of like how other people are acting and what that means about me, and just remembering like I am unconditionally loved no matter what by myself. And I know that working with you has helped me so much in getting there. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to offer to the people listening in terms of like what it really looks like to build that level of self-love with yourself.
Yeah, it's a good question. It really requires tending to ourselves in all of the moments. Like the way I look at it is that these parts of us are sort of knocking at the door, like, hey, I need your attention. I need your love and care and presence. And we're like so focused, like when you were talking about the depression, it's like, I want the depression to go away. Or for me, it was like, I want the heartbreak to go away. I want the pain, the hurt to go away. That we're like ignoring the fact that these parts of us are screaming for our attention. And, everybody has their own journey, but when you ignore it long enough, it's going to get louder and louder and louder. It's just the nature of like whatever your soul's lessons are. If you're meant to learn that lesson, it's going to get louder until you listen, or until you just like suffer until the end of your lifetime. So the more you can learn to listen and respond to these parts of you. I mean, the first step of listening is actually really challenging for a lot of people because they're disconnected from the communication within their bodies because they're so in their heads. So learning to listen is really important. And the first place to look is just what your life is presenting to you, where you feel stuck, what you feel isn't working in your life, what you're trying to get that feels like, life is resisting you, or you feel invisible, or whatever your life is showing you. People who are very emotional or like highly sensitive, we tend to feel the emotions coming up. For me, I was highly sensitive and very emotional growing up, and then I learned how to numb it out. And that was part of the process of the pain kicking in to bring me to the breath and reconnect me into the emotional body. So when you have, or if you have something, an experience like heartbreak or a challenge in a relationship, that can bring us into our emotional body. From there, we have to learn, how do I actually tend to the emotion? Breathwork is the most powerful tool I know to do that, because what ends up happening if you don't know how to bring love to the emotion and you don't use the breath, people tend to get kind of caught in this cycle of thought and emotion. So either they'll get into rumination, they'll wallow in their sorrow, or they'll like have a lot of big anger, and then it basically triggers, comes out, releases, and then you go into the cycle over and over and over and over again. The breath connects you to your heart, which brings in a level of love. You can do this consciously as well, but the emotion has to be held in love. That's what allows it to be alchemized. So, eventually the breath, I think, helps teach us how to keep our hearts open. Then we learn what that actually feels like. We learn how to develop a sense of self-love. Then we can bring it into our lives. So you're moving through life, you're having a challenging conversation, somebody activates you, you have that physical response in your body, and you know how to bring love, to call on love in those parts of yourself. That's the practice over and over and over again. What ends up happening is we transform in the process of that. It's really very simple. I think the biggest spiritual principles and paths to healing are very simple, but the application of it can be really challenging because what ends up happening is the lessons get more challenging. So you might master a certain level of it and you're like, oh, I love myself now. And then life throws you something more difficult. And it's like, well, how are you going to show up to this? How are you going to show up to this one? How are you going to show up to this one? And, it's very natural, really, to start fumbling because I know this was the case for me. You can feel like I mastered it, I've got it all down. And so then my life should kind of be smooth. I shouldn't be experiencing the level of difficulty. But actually, spiritually, for many of us, the lessons get more challenging, and then we have to amp up, how we're meeting the new lesson.
It's so many gems. I'm so happy that
I'm
you're
glad.
here. I feel like I'm going through a bit of that right now. And I was having a conversation with myself, um, like in the middle of the night, as one does. And I was like, why am I not asleep? What's going on? And I had to be honest and realize, like, okay, your body does not have space for everything that's happening right now. And you have to go back into the mindset of like, I'm opening again. I'm creating more space so that I can hold this version of my life. And that was like a significant adjustment because I had kind of not like coasted, but I had gotten to a place where everything felt neutral and I was easily able to hold and have space for everything that was going on. And then when I was like, okay, my sleep is going down and all these other like indicators of just like I don't even see necessarily a lot changing on the outside, but like I feel so different in my life and having to realize like, okay, this is similar to something that has happened in the past, and you just have to create the capacity again in the same way that you have before, or maybe differently, but like the commitment we need to make now is I am going to create enough space for what my body is experiencing in this moment, you know?
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, I've gone through something really similar, and it feels so nice when things are good for a long time. It's like, oh, I went through such a struggle, and so now this is the payoff. And, it's juicy when you're in it, it's great, but we didn't come here just to plateau. So, when the next thing happens that we need to look at, I think it just, everybody's on different journeys and has different life lessons. And some of us kind of get hit over and over again, but I think it's specifically because it's guiding us into learning something really important that we need on a soul level. And for some of us, it's to learn it and share it with other people so we can all grow together.
Mhm. One of the things that I remember you said, and in my eyes, you said this directly to me, but you also could have just said this like in one of the various pieces of content that I've consumed from you. But this idea of my sadness leaves behind a residue of wisdom, that has anchored me through so many challenging moments. And even now, it's something that I remember of like, it's okay and important for me to move through this because I know that there is wisdom there for me. Like, it's not just like, you know, difficult for no reason. And I think before I had really heard that principle or like similar sentiments that you express, it did feel like I'm just like going through all of this and like what is even the point, and like especially before it starts to actually like show in terms of your relationships or in terms of how you show up to life, or like before anything is like perceivable on the outside, remembering that like okay, I myself am getting wiser as I go through this, and that in and of itself is like gonna be the thing that pulls me forward. That has just been so instrumental to me.
I'm so glad that was a big yeah, intuitive insight I received because I just was releasing so much grief at this certain period of time in my life. And it's really challenging when you're in it because you don't, it's not like a layer of grief and then wisdom, a layer of grief and then wisdom, right? It's like you're in it. And like when you're not skilled yet at holding your emotions, it's really, really messy. So it's messy for a long time, and then you start to notice that something's changing and you're like receiving information. And particularly when you're doing it through the breath and you're activating self-love, it becomes clearer and clearer. Like at the end of a breathwork session, it's like you're not in the grief anymore. You might be in the tenderness, but the love is present. And when the love is present, you're receiving something. And a lot of times it's like intuitive insights, but the wisdom that is carried through the alchemization of the emotion is the thing that's meant to be received by us by processing it. It's kind of like the point of processing it. I mean, we want to be cleared out so we can have more freedom to feel like higher emotions like joy and love. But we also really want to receive the information that the emotion, the more dense emotion is here to give us.
This is actually a question that I get a lot, and I would like to hear your perspective on it. I have offered a program called Emotional Alchemy, where I was like teaching through the process as I understand it of like actually moving through an emotion and not cycling through it or feeling like you're just stuck in it. And that was actually one of the hardest things for me to like teach to people. And I'm wondering, like, the way I came away from it was like, I don't think this is like a course necessarily. I think it has to be a very immersive, like, experiential thing where people get the tools as they do it. And then maybe I help them process what they're experiencing. But if you had to describe verbally what it means to like alchemize an emotion, is that something that you feel like you could do?
Yeah, so are you saying the difference between like sort of getting stuck in the loop of the emotion and being kind of caught in it versus actually transmuting it into like a higher frequency?
Yes, because I think when we're talking about like, okay, your sadness leaves behind a residue of wisdom, a lot of people are like, well, I have been sad for years and it has not left the
Yes.
residue of wisdom yet.
Yeah.
And I've definitely felt that way too. So that sense of like, okay, what needs to actually happen for the cycle to break and for you to be free from it, you know?
It's really actually super simple, and it's something that I didn't really recognize fully for a long time too. It's meeting it with love.
Mm,
It has to be met with love. If you're not meeting that lower emotion with love, then it's either you're having a catharsis where you're releasing it, but you may not actually be transforming it into a higher frequency. So energy can't be created or destroyed. You might be having it moved through your system, but are you actually transforming your, it's hard to talk about this without getting into like energy stuff, but like transforming like the space, let's say the space in your body has to kind of be vibrating at a higher frequency to let in a frequency that's higher than sadness, let's say joy, which is much higher than sadness. It's vibrating at a much higher frequency. So in order to have that space be open, you have to meet it with love. And, it doesn't mean that you meet your sadness with love one time. That can be a process that you're doing over and over again. But essentially kind of goes back to what I was saying before, where like, okay, let's see, you meet your sadness with love, you open your heart, you feel this expansion, and then you go back into your life and you have this experience happen and you don't meet that experience with love. You have transformed in that moment when you're in a space where your heart is more open. But if you're not meeting that next moment, it's very easy for people to dip back because essentially your brain is really wired. If you've had a lot of experiences throughout your life that say like, people don't see me, nobody sees me, I'm invisible or whatever, and you go do breath work and you release the grief connected to nobody ever sees me, and you're like, oh, I see myself, I love myself. And then you go out into the world and you're like, excuse me to somebody, and everybody's ignoring you. The world hasn't caught up yet. And
Mhm.
it triggers you right back because you've had the very strong groove of being unseen. So you
Mhm.
need to keep on showing up for yourself in every moment. Oh, the world is showing me that I'm not seen, but I actually see myself. So in that moment, it's okay that person didn't hear me. I know I have something to say. I know that what I have to say matters. And you have to work through that in every moment. I think where people struggle is like separating the practice from life. The practices, the spiritual practices we have to show up for ourselves, we also have to recognize that life is a moment to moment practice. Life is constantly showing you an opportunity for you to show up more fully for yourself.
Yeah, that's honestly so special and important of like seeing life as a teacher and as something that you can like lean into, and also seeing it as something that you can meet differently. Like you can be in the same situation, but meet it differently. That was a big breakthrough that I had. Maybe like, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things I keep having over and over because then whenever you're in a situation, you're like, oh, I'm meeting this one differently too now. And like, but like starting to have the awareness of it maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, and then letting it be something that I carry with me of like, okay, even if this circumstance is not different, I am going to choose how I show up and not just default back to like how my past self would have showed up or how I would have showed up before I was unconditionally loving towards myself. And that takes such like a presence and a slowness and a willingness to like not just immediately make conclusions about everything right away. Is there anything that you do to cultivate that level of like presence?
More consciousness. It's always about cultivating more consciousness. So it's like that's really what everything is, right? The fabric of our reality is consciousness. Our attention is where we're bringing our conscious awareness.
Mhm.
And so many of us get caught in sort of the frequency of the culture is like checking out, and it's in the mind, it's in pleasure, it's not in conscious awareness, it's not in presence. And the more we can become present, to me, that is really, I think you spoke beautifully to that about slowing down. Slowing down allows us to become more aware of what's happening. The problem is that you have to sort of have it be a consistent practice of presence. Otherwise, you go unconscious. Like, I mean, most people are unconscious most of the time. We're just sort of running a program. And
Mhm.
so the like what you're describing where you're like, "Oh, I'm showing up to this situation differently." It's an awareness of I have agency right now. I have a choice right now, and I'm actually choosing everything in every single moment. It's a very different relationship than like I have to do this or I'm supposed to do this or like just sort of running on autopilot. So I think
Mhm.
that for me, it's like just checking in with myself consciously. I mean, it's sort of the framework of my reality, but like there's always times where I also like get checked out. Or I'm like, oh, where was I just then? But I think ultimately, the breath is always a really powerful practice for me. Meditation, slowing down, but really inhabiting my body. So just like noticing where I maybe have a habit of like, leaving my body, disassociating, even really subtly, because that's not like a big thing that happens for me so much anymore. But you have to kind of catch yourself because, especially when you've been on the journey for a long time, which you might also be feeling yourself, is like you can sort of feel like you're there, like you've landed in a place. And that is a trap that can get you caught in the like, I already know that, or I've already done that, or I've already been there. And then you miss something really valuable for your process.
Mhm. Mhm. Again, I feel like you're speaking right to me with what I'm been going through right now, and remembering the word that's coming up is like diligence, but I don't want it to sound like it's like authoritative and like judgmental, but just like the level of like persistent devotion that it took years ago for me to actually like walk myself back into my body and know how to meet different feelings with love. And like, again, you immensely valuable for all of that. And like, don't know how I would have done it otherwise, but just so grateful. But how much that took like a day to day, moment to moment willingness to break habits, like as Joe Dispenza says, I guess, of like, having the conversation with myself of like, just because I'm in the habit of thinking this when this happens, that doesn't mean that's the only thought I could think. That doesn't mean that's the only feeling I could be feeling right now. And like learning the difference between what's habitual and what's like natural, and like not getting into like, well, that's just the natural response and blah, 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 blah. And like that felt like just detangling this like really big messy knot of like hair or something, and it was just like ugh, ugh, ugh. And now it feels like what I'm going through, I have been kind of like resisting it and keeping it like intellectual, because I almost tell myself, well, I can just like theorize my way around what I'm feeling and just tell myself like you know that this is not going to help you, so stop feeling this way. And I was doing the work of Byron Katie this morning, and having to look at like, okay, is it true that I only want my mind to think self-loving thoughts, or do I look forward to having those other more difficult thoughts because that's my opportunity to like hold space for them and like to deepen my actual love for myself instead of just telling my brain what sentences I want it to give me. And like it is like such a spiral, you know? You're really
Yeah,
you're
I
done.
love. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. What was
No,
that?
that was all. That was it.
The word devotion, I think, is really beautiful, and that was a big word for me a couple of years ago as well, because it brings in the heart. So it's like commitment from the heart, and being devoted to yourself or to your spiritual path is so beautiful.
Mhm.
I think also, what you're speaking to is like the sort of the level of the mind, right? So it's like when we understand, like, kind of how, like, once you've been through like a wave of a healing journey and you've come out the other side and you're like, whoa, okay, I like get how this thing goes. It's like, okay, I just need to like keep my thoughts loving and kind, and like, show up for myself in whatever way in all of the moments and everything. But it's like when the mind is speaking to you, it's on the level of the mind, but it's not necessarily the solution to the need in the moment. So it's always kind of checking in, like the mind is going to be operating in a way that means that you just hang out there. The mind doesn't really want you to be going into your emotions. It doesn't want to be like, surrendered. That's the nature of the ego. It's like, I'm here to protect you, and, wants to have fun and do whatever, and that's all fine and good. But is it creating a trap where we're not able, or we're like kind of spinning or something? I think being able to catch that is also, again, part of like our life lessons.
What would you say to anyone who is finding themselves intellectualizing their emotions, or maybe kind of having a lot of knowledge about about even just the idea of like, well, these are unhelpful thoughts and these are helpful thoughts, and like, can I just guide myself to think differently? One of the things I really admire about you is that you do offer journaling, but you don't focus so much on like the changing of thoughts. How do you think about this?
I love the mind, so I'll just say that first and foremost. Like I'm a very like analytical,
Mhm.
intellectual person. So I'm not somebody who is like forget the mind, but I do think we need to forget the mind a lot of times in order to access something that can transform us and have the mind be of service to the soul. Because most of us have a different relationship where we're sort of a victim of the mind. The mind is just running us. And so we're not really showing up in the way we want to in our lives. We're not doing the work that we came here to do. We're not able to be of service the way that we want to be of service. So I think that there's a time and place for sort of thought changing or like working on the level of the mind. I think it's important, like always. I actually have a practice of paying very close attention to the language I'm using, because the language that we use is communicated from the subconscious. So if you find yourself saying things, I think it's really helpful to recognize what you're saying and to catch yourself. If you're not, if you're like a newbie, you could start to feel like I'm not allowed to say, you can kind of feel trapped within yourself where you're like overly policing what you're communicating so that you don't say the wrong thing. And that's not going to be helpful because it's still in your subconscious. So you want to kind of be loose about it where you recognize that what I'm saying is telling me something about myself that is really important. One of the things that I really love about journaling also is that when you're really journaling and you're letting it flow, you're connecting to your intuition. So it's not your mind being like, this is how things are supposed to be. You're actually getting deeper access, usually to your emotions and what you're feeling. So it can be a good bridge for people. I would just say for people who are like working on the level of mind, just recognizing that you have to be working also, in the emotional body as well. And my personal feeling is on a more spiritual level. So bringing in the heart and working with love. Otherwise, some things will change. And for some people, it might be enough. Like it depends on the person and like what their journey is. It might be, enough to make some big transformations and to move them from a state of deep negativity into positivity. There was actually a book I used to recommend, and I read it a long time ago. I think it was called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. A really small book, like really, really short. And if I recall correctly, he just kept saying, I love myself. Oh, I think he was very, very depressed and just kept saying, I love myself over and over and over again. And his life transformed. I don't know where he's at now. And, if you're like 10 years, 20 years out from something like that, you might say, well, there are a whole lot of other things, but I think that it can be really valuable for people. But for most of us, especially people who are highly sensitive and have a history of trauma, there's a lot more that needs to be dealt with, but it's a piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's layers, as the word keeps coming up, but one of the things that you introduced me to that's like feels similar to this idea of like just saying I love myself. You introduced me to Louise Hay, actually. I don't know if you realized that, but I had no idea who Louise Hay was until you. And now I actually do Louise Hay affirmations like every single day, like hundreds of times. I have done these affirmations, and they have been helping me so much. One thing I've been noticing though is that when I'm doing them, especially depending on where I'm coming from in my day, like for example, there was a time when I had an argument with my sister, and I realized that I had like instigated the argument because I was insecure and like I was just like feeling a lot of feelings, and I was doing the affirmations and having to like hold the feelings that I was feeling while I was saying other things and like noticing all of what was going on in my body and really like breathing through it, and then actually coming home to myself or walking myself back to the place of like, okay, the feelings I'm feeling about all of this and like the shame and the frustration and whatever are real and deserve space. And all of these thoughts that Louise Hay is offering me are also true. Like I believe what she is having me say about myself. And after going through that experience of saying the affirmations and feeling the feelings, I actually got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to apologize to my sister and not make it this whole thing that it doesn't need to be, but just explain to her like I was tired and it had nothing to do with you, in a way that felt very like respectful and that honored like where I was at, but also where I know I want to be. And that was a very profound experience of being in my body and also working with thoughts. And even when they didn't feel like they were aligned, that something happened and it just like got me to a new point in how I can bridge the gap between the way I had been showing up and the way I wanted to show up, you know?
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love her affirmations. I mean, she was such a powerhouse. I think what's also helpful to recognize is that affirmations, and her affirmations in particular, are the ultimate truth of who we all are.
Yeah.
So it's like it may not feel true in that moment when you have shame or guilt or, grief coming up. It may not feel like it's true. We use affirmations in breath work, and the way that I think about it is like, the heaviness that's coming up, we affirm the truth of our nature, and then usually there's like an activation, like, I'm worthy of love. And if you don't fully feel worthy of love, it's going to bring up grief. But that frequency that those words carry is the ultimate truth of who you are, and then it allows you to tend to the part of you that is essentially living in a lie. You love that part of you, and then it brings you into you bring that part into your heart, and then that part can eventually, if you keep doing it, come into alignment with the truth of your nature.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to see. And I think a lot of the times when I had worked with affirmations before, and even sometimes with clients, they'll say like, I just feel like I'm lying to myself. And also, I don't see anything really changing when I do these affirmations. But I think it depends on you being also maybe like more so emotionally available to like what actually happens when I say this, and can I hold space for like the totality of that and allow it to change me rather than like I think when I was feeling like I'm just lying to myself and not seeing any changes, it was because I was leaning so heavily on the thought to be the thing that was the agent of change rather than like letting the vibration of the thought in and letting that mix around with what was inside of me and then letting myself change, you know?
Yeah, it's actually about the willingness. So I
Mm.
think a lot of people who are like, "Oh, it's not doing anything," there's actually a disconnect in the willingness for transformation to happen.
Mm.
I keep having my dad coming to mind because my dad was diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago. And it's like when you wake up to, like, I could die, which we all could, but like if you get a diagnosis like that, it lights a fire under your ass to, like, not for everybody, of course. Like, I'm really grateful my dad is like deeply committed to his healing path now, but he says a million affirmations a day. He's just like running them off like every day for a couple of years now because he has this motivation of like, I want to be alive. And I
Mhm.
think this is why we suffer. We suffer to wake ourselves up to, I don't actually have to be suffering. Like, my suffering is actually a choice. If it's just resistance to what is. We're in resistance to our pain. We're in resistance to our emotions. And then when we recognize I don't actually need to be in resistance to this, it stops suffering. It still hurts, but then you're actually on a path where something can transform.
Wow. I just have to like let that land for a second. That was like, I really needed to hear that for some reason. Yeah, that place of like really looking at your willingness, being honest with yourself about your willingness to change. That's something that I have been really having conversations with myself about, especially because I have like there were so many things that felt awful that now feel resolved, and I'm like, okay, what is my willingness to like continue changing things about my life? Not from a place of like my life isn't good, but from a place of like I think there's more fulfillment for me. I think there are other things like even like maybe a partner one day again or something like that. Like, am I willing to actually go down that road with myself and holding space for the parts of me that are like, no, I am actually not willing to look at that or to do that. And remembering that like the willingness piece deserves a conversation. And it doesn't have to be like I'm trying to convince myself to be willing, but just remembering like, okay, until I'm willing, nothing will actually change or move. And I'll just be patient with myself as I go on the journey of like becoming willing to go down certain roads again, you know?
Yeah, and this is actually where the mind can end up messing us up because it's like, okay, I'm willing to grow. The mind has a lot of ideas of what that looks like, or like, I'm willing to get into partnership again. The mind is not going to pick the path forward that's painful. But, it might be that something needs to get cleared out, or you have to look at something more deeply in order to be put on the path that aligns you with the thing that you're saying you're willing to experience.
Hmm. Mhm. Okay. Are there any thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with as they like process all of this and maybe as they're trying to like apply it to their lives? Like what would you have us to keep in mind?
I think, particularly for people who maybe feel overwhelmed, either where they're at or with like information coming in, is that like you don't need to figure it out with your mind. If you're in a place where you feel like you're searching outside yourself for all of the answers, or you're trying to find the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, you're working on the level of the mind. And it's usually a mechanism to avoid being with what is right now. Everything that's available to you in your life in this moment is all you need. All the information within you is all you need right now in this moment. When you are ready for more information, it will reveal itself to you in the moment that it's needed. Everything that's going on in your life is all the information you need to move to the next level of who you're becoming. Bridging that gap, again, when the mind is trying to figure it out, makes it usually much more complicated. Like I was saying earlier, like the simplest things are the most profound. They really are. To me, working with the breath and bringing in love and conscious awareness, it's very, very simple and it's very difficult in practice. So if you can simplify whatever your practices are, all the, nowadays you could be doing a huge list of things that like makes a little bit of a budge. But if you were to focus on one thing that is very deeply transformative for you, particularly through commitment, we're also living in a culture that still is oriented towards like hacks and quick fixes and stuff. The spiritual path is not that. We're on it until we're on it indefinitely. Like it's not ending, even if, our lives end. So it really requires like a deep commitment to your own heart and to your own soul. And I think that the more you can come into, that devotion to whatever it is for you, keep it really, really simple and let it be your anchor through whatever you're experiencing.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I had such a great time chatting with you.
Uh, Same. I am gonna listen to this over and over. How can people get to know more about you? Maybe if they've never done breath work before, which would be unimaginable because they've heard me talk about it so much. But just in case, or just any way that they could get in touch with you.
Yeah, my website is pushingbeauty.com. I'm sure you'll have it linked wherever.
Mhm.
And yeah, I have a free guided breathwork meditation that's pretty popular on YouTube. If you just type in my name and breathwork, a lot of times just typing in breathwork on YouTube, it'll pop up for people who are totally new. I also have a like getting started with breathwork little kit on my website for people who are new. And yeah, all the information about me and my story and all of that's on my website.
Amazing. Well, this has been amazing and wonderful in all of the ways. My heart feels so full. And I know that our listeners are going to get so much out of this. So thank you for taking the time, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Samara.